Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations, the space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Being a founder or a product person calls for enjoying the ride, even when things are super uncertain. While grit and passion are the regulars, it takes a few more skills like competence, agency, clarity of thought to be able to navigate that uncertainty. And this means you've got to be ready to embrace challenges, relearn some of what you thought you already knew, and find new pieces of information to put together. First things first, how do we all get started? I have someone with me here today who is the go to person in the product world to learn of whatever I spoke to you about now. Before we go into our episode, let's listen from our sponsor. Picture this: you've just recorded and published an exceptional podcast episode. Now, imagine if you could transform that single episode into months of engaging content. Introducing Recast Studio, your ultimate AI powered podcast marketing assistant. Recast Studio automatically finds the most engaging and share worthy highlights from your episodes and generates short form video clips and audiograms that captivate your audience on social media. It writes compelling show notes, blog posts, social media posts, newsletters, and much more. No more struggling to find new ideas or spending hours repurposing your podcast content. Recast Studio does the heavy lifting for you so you can focus on what you do the best, creating amazing podcast episodes. I've been personally using Recast and my journey has been fantastic. I love the way I can play around with the templates and find those engaging AI-based highlights that I can get from my episode. Try it out at recast.studio, which is recast.studio. That's Recast Studio for you. Super excited to have Shreyas Doshi, a seasoned product leader and presently a fantastic advisor to founders across the globe. Shreyas formerly led teams at Stripe, Yahoo, Google, Twitter, and is most known to the product world as a coach who writes detailed threads on many unsaid and important topics. Shreyas, I'm super excited to have you on the Founders Foyer. It's been such a dream ever since I started the podcast. So thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I think it took almost a year of conversation to get to this moment, and I'm thrilled to be here. And thank you for the conversation today.
Yep, totally. And let's dive deep into the core. Your approach to simplifying product content is like a psychology example that I've seen. I'm saying this because I find people gravitating to hard truths that you share, not because they can immediately be fed what to do and how to do, but it's because of the long term impact that it could have due to that periodic exposure to something that's very distilled and core. This seems like a play to many people, but I know how much time and how much of a challenge it would have been for you to arrive at this technique that's so unique and that's very raw, but still like super important. So, what are those challenges that you had to tackle, and how did you get to this place that you found your own space to be in?
Well, the simple answer is I don't know. I don't know how I am able to do this. I think what you're describing and what I hear from a lot of people is uh, that somehow when they read something I've written, it gives them, in a very concise manner, a way to understand the world around them, to understand team interactions, to understand product challenges, to understand strategic challenges or go to market challenges, or sometimes even just general management tactics and challenges. So oftentimes when I'll write something, I will get DMs from people who say that, you know what, you wrote this for product management or you wrote this for tech companies. And I'm not in product management. I'm not in a tech company. I am in a law firm and I'm a lead at a law firm. And you shared something about how to influence your team.
Mhm.
And while what you wrote was very specific with examples for tech products, it resonated strongly with me. It's something I have been doing, but now, the what you wrote gave me a much more structured way of thinking about it, and also gave me a vocabulary that I can share first with myself so I can understand why this
Hmm.
works. A lot of us try a bunch of different things, and then we find something starts working. And so we say, huh, that's interesting. Any smart person, as they find something starts working, they will start doing more of it. They will start tweaking it to make it work better. And so we arrive at certain ways that we know work. But sometimes in that journey, we don't really figure out why it works. So that's one part. And the second part is we often, 9 cases out of 10, even though it works for us, we don't know how to help others get there as well. Right. So that's why sometimes I'll hear from people that, oh, the vocabulary you shared in this piece, whatever it was that you wrote, that is very powerful because that I can share with my team. And now we're speaking the same language. And now we're speaking the same language from the perspective of being extremely objective and not blaming anybody.
Hmm.
Right. So if there is some anti pattern, right, say there is an anti pattern I talk about in product development, which is the execution orientation fallacy,
Yeah.
where we create plans mainly based on what we know we can easily execute rather than what is right for the customer, because that may be hard. Or we also avoid ambiguity, which is sometimes, ambiguity you do have to face head on. We avoid it because if
Hmm.
we start to tackle the ambiguity, we won't be able to execute on something very quickly and easily. So that's the execution oriented fallacy that causes all sorts of problems on product teams, and is one of the leading causes of product failure among otherwise smart teams. So once you're equipped with this term, the execution orientation fallacy, it becomes much more psychologically safe for anybody on the team. Doesn't have to be the team leader, but for anybody on the team, when we encountered this situation where we're like, let's just do all the low hanging fruit and we're not going to tackle this high impact thing because it requires a contentious conversation with this other team and we hate that team and whatever the reason might be, that somebody on the team can now say, this is a fine plan, but I worry that we might be
Hmm.
falling prey to the execution orientation fallacy, right? By
Yeah.
saying that, we are not blaming anybody, right? And we are actually taking a high sense of responsibility. We are raising our collective self awareness. So it makes these types of conversations and interactions much easier. So, anyway, getting back to the original question you had asked, I don't know how I am able to do this, or I am doing this in a way that resonates for many people across many different fields. Uh, but if I were to guess, it's mainly because I have perhaps been a keener and deeper observer of
Hmm.
group interactions, of organizational dynamics, having been part of many, many such organizations. And while I have obviously, been on the ground and done all the work necessary, I have also taken time throughout my career to kind of take a higher level view of like, okay, this is upsetting, but what is causing this feeling of upset? Is there some
Hmm.
pattern here? Is this something that I'm experiencing right now that's similar to something else I experienced 2 or 3 years ago? Oh, yes, there is actually a pattern, right?
Yeah.
Where the pattern is that somebody's micromanaging because they're actually insecure about being a manager themselves. They're a new manager and they're still trying to prove to themselves they deserve the job. And so, voila, they end up micromanaging, right? So
Hmm.
it might be two entirely different companies, two entirely different individuals, but the pattern is the same, right? And the underlying human motivation, the underlying human biases remain the same across the board. So just out of perhaps that habit of observing these things from a level higher or two levels higher, uh,
Hmm.
perhaps I'm able to kind of express it in a way that resonates across various groups and geographies and domains.
Right. Yeah. Those are a couple of amazing points. And just to get to each of them that you mentioned, the shared vocabulary part is something I can definitely agree with. And I've seen that personally with folks who have followed your content. And when we, like, let's say, initiate chats, right from the LNO to shitty first drafts, all of these terminologies have become more of a common usage between people. The fact that it makes them to have those conversations a bit easier. So today, if I have to go to somebody and then a fellow PM and then talk to them about, hey, yeah, like if you feel very difficult about the start, why not make like a shitty first draft? And people get it, like they know what it really means. And this is something that just not applies to the product space, but uh, folks like me and folks like others who have probably like gone through that, we try to use that and adapt that to anything that we do, which is like writing a piece of blog or trying to just start our work with anything. So what's the first level of completion that we could have, and like, what's the first thing you can make that you're not judging by? So I can like completely resonate with you when you said about the shared vocabulary part, and I think it's very crucial that you hit that note there with the work that you're doing. And to come to the whole the why do we do this? I think off grid we were just chatting about the way creators today put out content and a lot of creative process being involved. One pitfall that I often find with people who put out amazing content consistently and have like a sort of a pattern and sort of like a calendar map on to follow is that they get great with putting out good content with each step following, but they don't look back to say, okay, why does this perform? Or it's the other extreme where they're so obsessed on the why, like, okay, why did this perform? Like, why didn't I get 10 likes here, whereas I got like 5 likes there? And they don't reflect on the why of the content really, but more of why of the performance. So amidst a lot of those, I think wired patterns that creators or people who are creating some stuff could fall into, uh, your process stands out a little different because it's more about distilled observations and not just putting out content because there's an audience to follow it or there's somebody looking for it. So if I have to pick unique things from what you just shared, I find that these two parts of it really resonate with people, and like you said, that's why people follow the content.
Yeah, yeah. And shout out to Julian and Wes Cow for the shitty first draft. That's where I encountered that idea and have used it ever
Right.
since. And it's such a powerful idea. And, sometimes the names are so important as well. So when, as a creator, you're creating these things, you got to be very thoughtful about the name. And sometimes when I am, coming up with uh, a label for a phenomenon that I've seen widely, these days, I use the subscribers channel, which is a small group of like 900
Mm.
to 1,000 people on Twitter, and I'll ask them, "Hey, I'm trying to describe this situation. Here's the situation. What are some evocative, memorable names and that we can perhaps consider for this?" And I always that wisdom of the crowds is great because I always get some neat ideas versus me just thinking about it all on my own. So,
Yeah.
yeah, these things are so important. The naming is so important. And once
Yeah.
again, shout out to Julian and Vescow, from whom I first encountered this idea of shitty first draft, and has been super helpful for me as well as somebody who writes and is in a creative path.
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for that tidbit. I didn't know it was Westcow and Julian, so it's good to know that. And just a shout out to you as well here because I'm a part of the subscribers channel and I know how much of great knowledge that being subscribers of the channel can bring through. So it's definitely like interesting to float those thoughts around. And I think that's the best part of getting to content, right? It's the fact that you float these ideas around, try to rethink this, give it that time, not just arrive at something immediately, but keep getting back to it and then use those collective knowledge from peers around to finally distill and get to where we want to be. So that's the other highlight from whatever I've seen with your content and with the practice that you've been following. And the last important point that I could take from what you shared was the part that you said you keenly connect the dots. And I think that's something that most of us don't realize that a happenstance at one situation can actually have a correlation or relativity with something else, and we often find these situations as very singular. Like we take, okay, I was at a situation A, and then I had to work with this manager, and the kind of things that I had to go through are completely different. This could have a very similar pattern with another situation with another completely different person. But yeah, we always look at it more in depth at each event, that we forget to look at it from a slightly higher level to be able to connect both. So I think it's beyond content of what you said, that we could apply to whatever situations we go through in both product and otherwise, to be able to connect those patterns and have a narrative that you can form for yourself. And that comes, I think it eventually becomes a mindset more than a habit over time. So yeah, that's again something we have to cultivate.
Yeah, I think all situations are situations of human comprehension.
Mhm.
So pretty much anything that you do, whether it's an product you build or experience you create, or an experience you go through yourself,
Mm.
or a product that you use yourself, they're all uh, at the base level situations where we are trying to make sense of something as a human being, right?
Yeah.
And once you really internalize that, y- a whole different way of being creative, well, first being empathetic, and then second
Mhm.
being creative, opens up to you, because ultimately now the way you can think about pretty much anything is, here's a human being, or here's a set of human beings. They are exposed to this stimulus, whatever the stimulus might be. What do we expect to happen? How do we expect this human being to react to this stimulus,
Mhm.
right? And that's where you can start going back into your pattern matching library, or your pattern library, right? And start pattern matching, which is, okay, so there might be other different, distinct situations, distinct domains where a human being encountered a different stimulus, right? And what was their reaction there,
Mm.
right? Now let's analyze why they reacted perhaps the way they did in that situation. Because in that situation, you have access to the truth, right? Or some version of truth, which is the observed behavior,
Yeah.
or the manifested behavior, right? And when you have enough of these patterns and you ask the why question, it now informs what you are going to do in the future, which is almost the antithesis of truth, because, like, or it's at least the lack of truth, because it's not yet happened,
Yeah.
right? And so as you go, back to these various patterns that you might have seen, and you ask the why question, your brain, we talk about all these kind of large language models, etc., that predict what the next word is going to be or whatever, right? Like, and it seems like magic, right? Like in some ways, there's a large language model in here and in here, right? So,
Yeah.
so, so that's how these things operate, right? So when you see a new situation, a new prompt, if you will, right? Because we get amazed when, like, we give ChatGPT like an entirely crazy new prompt, something it has never encountered before, right? And
Yeah.
it produces sometimes something plausible, right? Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's really low quality, but at times it's like, hey, it's better than an average human being could, right? So it's getting something right. And the point is, we all have that capacity, right? We all have that capacity that when given this new prompt, right, which we haven't seen before, we can start looking at past patterns, and
Right.
the model already knows. So it's not like this, we have to do this sequential search through all of our life's history, because that
Mhm.
would take forever. But the key here is, like, if you somehow get in the habit of asking the why question
Right.
regularly, why does this happen, right? Why does this product do this thing in this way? right? Why is this email signed off with this greeting, right? If you look around you, this sort of knowledge and these patterns are everywhere, right?
Hmm.
So if instead of just looking at that pattern and saying, well, in this type of marketing email, you should start with this call to action or you should end with this call to action. Yes, you are learning something, but you're missing out on the real learning, right? Because you
Hmm.
never asked why. You just asked
Yeah.
what, right? And how much. You might say, oh, what is it? And how much uplift does it have?
Hmm.
So I encourage people to ask the why question. Why does it have uplift? Right? Because that will actually inform your model, right? That will enhance your model such that the next time you get a prompt, which may be a
Hmm.
little different, you'll now be able to do magic, right? Whereas
Yeah.
everybody else, your competition, is doing a pretty basic dumb search through like basically like a library, which is like, well, what are all the call to actions I've seen and what were all the uplifts from those call to actions? And oh, this one worked best. So let's just pick this one. Whereas if you
Yeah.
ask the why question, you augmented that model that lies within you, you'll be able to come up with something unique that is actually optimal. So,
Right.
so that is the key to progress. It's the key to empathy. It's the key to creativity in
Hmm.
any field, right? It's not just tech products, right? And that further, and I'll end with this, further means that if you want to get great at this, if you want a great model to be built in here, uh,
Hmm.
be open to things outside of just your domain. Maybe start with your domain because there's enough in your domain, but be open to everything, right? You are at a concert, right? Like, why did they organize it this way, right? Why this sequence of songs, right? Why these costumes, right? You're at a sporting event. Why did they do this little thing in the intermission, right? Like, there's just so many whys, but you
Yeah.
have to go back to all of these things. They are trying to create an experience
Hmm.
that human beings can comprehend, right? And that is your job, right? Like, how do you enable in whatever field you're working in, how do you enable an experience that the human beings you're serving can comprehend in the best possible way?
Yeah, completely agree with that. And yeah, you would rather want your model to be generative rather than like a query search in the DB where it just gives you like, oh yeah, here's the answer, but that's not like really adaptive to the situation, not really asked that why and got to the core of why is this really happening. To me, when you explain it, also sounds like a way to develop different lenses through which you can look at what is happening in the sense that sometimes when you ask why, you always put yourself in that situation and you try to think, okay, what would I do and why is this happening? And it's mostly from your perception. But when this why and different scenarios are being stitched together, you also try and understand, okay, why is this happening and why is this person doing it this way? So you try to get a different narrative because you're trying to understand the why from a different person's lens. And like this, I think you can accumulate a couple of lenses through which you can look at a situation, and that makes you like not think of yourself like a holier than thou kind of a thing, but then makes you understand why did somebody take a certain decision or why is this happening from another person's perspective. So that's what I could hear when you explained about developing a sense of why.
Yeah, for sure. And this leads me to an observation that, in product work particularly, and particularly as it pertains to the very ambiguous work of what product to build,
Hmm.
in what order to build it, how to sell it, how to make macro and micro decisions, uh, whether to address a customer concern or not, whether to drop something from our standard roadmap to address a customer ask, if it's a large customer or a strategic customer, whether to build a feature we know is not going to get used by users but will enable us to charge. So it's basically not a value feature; it's a monetization feature. These types of questions come up all the time for product people. Uh, And product success really is not just about getting things done, because, yeah, it is important to get things done. It's a necessary condition, but it's not a sufficient condition, because the sufficient condition is that you are getting the right things done, which means that you're
Mm.
making good choices and often optimal choices when you're faced with these questions that I just listed. And one common challenge I see that relates to the point you made earlier is that the higher IQ the person,
Mm.
the more difficult it is for that person to appreciate and empathize with points of view other than their own personal points of view, right? And like with
Mm.
anything in life, this is not 100% um, guarantee that this will happen. It's all about whether there's a high correlation or not. And, when you work on these highly talented teams of like highly accomplished people, uh, you will end up with a bunch of people that have extremely high IQs. They're always correct, right? When there is a factual question, right? There are many people,
Mm.
like, and up to certain extent, I counted myself as one of those people. I'm always correct, right? You give me a mathematics problem, I'm always correct, right? Or you give me a question about some event in history, I'm always correct, or at least I'm always correct to the extent that the reference book validates it, right? Uh, who knows what happened in history, but like at least the reference book says I'm correct, right? So, so what ends up happening sometimes in teamwork is we are discussing some issue, and maybe it's some urgent customer ask, right? And there might be somebody on your team, right, who's just like very high IQ. They're just like very clearly sharp and smart, right? And they're also quick on their feet, right? So it's easy to kind of shut something down through a very like intelligent argument, which is
Mm.
like, well, you know, yeah, I see why they're asking for it. Uh, but this is how I would do it. And clearly, this is the smarter way to do it, right? They should not be using CSV uploads. They should just be, I don't know, they should just be doing webhook uh,
Yeah.
integration. And that's so much better. That's so much simpler. And this is so prone to errors. It's manual and it's just not the right thing, right? I'm just using some simple example.
Yeah.
But we all encounter these examples and we all encounter these individuals. And sometimes we ourselves are those individuals. I have been this individual in many
Yeah.
rooms in the past. Uh, and that gets in our way, right? That gets in our way of actually thinking about the problem more from a, again, human comprehension problem, right? Which is like, oh, yes, this might be the ideal way of doing things,
Mm-hmm.
but organizations are not ideal, teams are not ideal, processes are not ideal. And to get to that ideal state, to get to your customer to the ideal state, you have zero to no control,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so, yes, it's fine to say, well, this is an antiquated way of doing things. But if that's how your customer is used to doing things, and that is part of their mission critical process, right? It is foolish to kind of dismiss it as like, well, this is stupid, right? We clearly have a better way. And you know what? Let's put that better way on our website. Let's say no to all CSVs or whatever the case might be, right? And you think that you're doing something great. But if you're going after an enterprise customer, right, where the department head who's going to be the recommender for your product wants to preserve his or her job or wants to make his or her job easier, right?
Mm.
You are basically doing an anti sell, which is like, please don't buy
Yeah.
my product because it's going to require a lot of disruption to you.
Yeah.
Uh, and and we do these kinds of things both again on the side of like deciding what to
Mm.
build, how to build it, and then how to market it, right? And all along,
Yeah.
we think we are doing the right thing, right? So it is important now. So what's the solution here? Like the solution is not to lower one's IQ, right?
Hmm.
Like high IQ is a great asset, but the
Yeah.
solution is to really understand that there will always be different perspectives on these situations of human comprehension.
Hmm.
Not like human beings, you know, as soon as a group becomes a group, whether it's a group of 3 people, 4 people, 5 people, human beings are not going to see the same situation in the same way, right? This is a fundamental reality that goes well beyond products, right? Like, and it goes into all sorts of things like geopolitics and society, right?
Absolutely.
So that recognition that people think
Hmm.
differently than me, and that is
Hmm.
okay.
Hmm.
And also, I need these people that think differently from me, even if I might have some disdain for their antiquated ways of looking at things. I need them because they are a revenue source for me. I am in service of for them or to them. That
Yeah.
humility becomes very essential. And so, therefore, establishing that sort of humility becomes an
Hmm.
essential job of a founder early on, because and it has to start early on. It is not possible to do it after your 500th employee, because by that time the organization, the company, has
Hmm.
taken a life of its own.
Yeah.
It's like rearing a teenager, right? At some point you can control them when they're little children, when they're 11, 12, but at some point when they're 15, 16, 17, 18, yeah, you have built this thing in some ways, right? uh, you have made this thing in some ways, but it's not in your control. It's the same way with your company,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of these things have to start early.
Yeah. Very true. And a lot of these things are also aligned with what the culture of a product and culture of a team could stand for. Because, like you said, if this is going to be done later in time, it's just too much in the curve that people would just start mimicking, or people would just start understanding, oh, so this is tolerant. Okay, let me start acting this way. If somebody who has high IQ can actually diss this and can still take the seat in the room, I think I can also do this way. And this is how I get inspired. So I think this just like gets through with everybody on the team. So largely, I see this to be rooted in the culture and the kind of story that you want to tell, both for the product, like a lot of it being positioning for both the product and also the team within the company and the company within the larger ecosystem.
Mhm.
Yeah. Hey, folks, if you enjoy listening to Shreyas thoughts just like I do, you can check out his product management course on Maven. Shreyas covers the complete breadth of PM specific concepts like competence, product sense, choosing career paths, and so much more. I loved being a part of his early course cohort, and the added benefit was to find a community of brilliant PMs with whom you can connect and discuss product stuff. Check out his course at bit.ly/Shreyas-course or by scanning the QR code that you see on the screen. So, Shreyas, since we're talking about the agency and trying to raise your thoughts and perspectives, there's the other extreme of this curve that I would want to touch upon, which is facing resistance. And I love this book that you often keep suggesting to folks about War of Art. And there's this interesting thought that I took from the book, which is the more important a certain action is, the more resistance that you feel towards it. And this is also the reason why doing that is extremely gratifying to you as a person when you finally get it done. So, as PMs, founders, builders, there is some sort of resistance we face, not just externally, but a lot to do with the inner voices and a lot to do with the fear and the layers that we put for ourselves. So, how do you think we can harness this and take our way and steer forward along with the resistance and sort of like battling this resistance?
um, yeah, I love this question because this has been a constant feature of my life and career,
Mm,
where in my personal life, find myself avoiding important things that I know I should do. Uh, and then similarly in work life, oftentimes avoiding the harder thing, whether it's writing that fresh document with a new proposal for something ambiguous, or delaying that tough conversation with a colleague where I know it's not going to go, as well from their perspective as all my other conversations with them. And perhaps they're going to, get some bad news. Perhaps there's going to be some, uh, you know, high degree of emotional turmoil. And there's just so many situations at work where sometimes we take the easy path and we don't work on something that we know is essential. And yet, all great progress, the biggest progress we know as proof, comes from us just working through it, right? The only way out is through, right? Like just work through it. Um, so it is a tough challenge, and it's something that never really goes, never really goes. In fact, well, not in fact, but at least in my observation,
Mm.
the higher the bar of the person, the higher the creative bar, uh, the finer your taste, right? The tougher it is for you to get through this, to start or to finish, but mainly to combat this fear,
Yeah.
right? I envy colleagues who just like start a task. I'm like, wait, this is like a very important strategy thing, and yeah, I just wrote it in 2 3 hours. I'm like, for me, I would have to just like sit on it for 2 to 3 weeks, not even writing a word, but just thinking about it, thinking, exploring different angles of it, maybe talking to a few people, maybe doing some internet research or whatever. But like, I would find all sorts of reasons to procrastinate on sort of writing this thing. And you just sat down one day and blocked your calendar and wrote it in 2 3 hours, and that is super commendable. I want to be you, right? But then over time I realized I don't want to exactly swap positions with you, uh, because I find that there is a lot of value in letting
Mm.
something sit, especially if it's something highly high leverage and creative work,
Right.
because the answer isn't going to come to you immediately. The best answers I've got, the best product insights I've got them as I let the problem and let the possible solutions and all the inputs I got from colleagues and customers and dashboards and data and various other things, industry data. I just let it sit with me for a few weeks, sometimes a month plus, right? Uh, and, sometimes your mind is processing and problem solving something very subconsciously, very subconsciously. So that's when sometimes, that's why many people, they get their best insights, like the classic ones are while driving, or in the
Mm.
shower, or right after waking up and whatnot, right? And that's because, at least partly, it's because of your mind kind of processing what it knows is important for you,
Mm.
what is knows is fun and interesting to you. And then at some point, the mind is just a channel
Right.
for the universe to provide you a creative path forward, right? And we can call that our intuition, right? And so, in that
Right.
sense, intuition is the creative language of the universe.
Mm.
And so it is also important to recognize that, right? Uh, Now, all that said, this is, I do want to share some very specific thoughts on how to combat this this resistance, this creative
Yeah.
lock. And just yesterday, I shared, a perspective with my subscribers group on Twitter, which I wanted to just like perhaps share with you because it very concisely describes, my current thoughts on this topic. So it starts now. If you find yourself procrastinating on something important, it sometimes helps to A, recognize that it is happening because of some latent fear. Okay. Recognize that it is happening because of some latent fear. B, then forgive yourself for it. Okay. Forgive yourself for it. C, remind yourself that fear is a normal feature of life. Okay. It's a feature, not a bug. Fear is a normal feature of life for 99.999% of people in the world. Okay.
Yeah.
D, try to get to the root of the fear in this instance. Try to get to the root of the fear without judging yourself. E, then instead of wishing the fear away, tell yourself that you can still take the first step, even though this fear exists. So let the fear exist. The fear is
Mm.
there. Don't wait for some fantasy moment when the fear is gone and then I will start, right? Because that may never arrive. So let
Yeah.
the fear be here. Don't don't wish it away. Just tell yourself that you can still take the first step.
Mm.
And that could be, just create the Google Doc. Literally go to Google Docs and say file new, right? And now, or docs.new, right? Like just you have a blank Google Doc. Give it a
Yeah.
title, right? Add some sections to it. That's it,
Mm.
right? Start composing the email if it's some email you need to send out that's like very tough, or send an invite for the contentious meeting, right? Like whatever it is, take that first step. Now
Mm.
that you've taken the first step, then congratulate yourself for taking this first step, perhaps even rewarding yourself with something you love, right? So for me,
Yeah.
it's usually like something like boba tea or something. These days, I've had some minor health issues, so I'm not having boba tea. But for me, for a while, it was boba tea. So reward yourself with something you love, even if that reward is disproportionately high versus
Mm.
the time and effort you put into it. So even if the time you put into it, the time doesn't matter. The great
Yeah.
thing is that you let the fear be and you took that first step, right? So I don't want you to measure yourself against time or effort, which is like, oh, I did something only for 5 minutes.
Mm.
Because you need to recognize the amount of willpower and the amount of courage it took you to kind of still take that first step in the presence of that fear is tremendous, even if it took you just 5 minutes to do it. So reward yourself disproportionately because your brain likes those rewards. Okay.
Yeah.
Then either continue with the momentum of that task if you feel like going. For many people, they just now feel like going because there's
Yeah.
momentum, right? Or at this point, switch to another more comfortable task, like answering some
Mm.
Slack messages, getting your quick dopamine hits, or whatever. But now you have a feeling of strength from having taken that first step in the face of fear. Okay. So that's kind of like
Yeah.
the, step by step recipe. And then I
Yeah.
ended this subscriber tweet with like, next time, repeat this.
Mm.
Okay. Again, repeat this. Over time, it will get slightly easier. It's not good. It never
It's not
goes
going to
away
go
and
away.
definitely hasn't for me. Right.
Yeah.
But you do make progress with practice. So that's what I would leave you with on this
Mm.
topic.
Very actionable, and I can completely empathize with what you were mentioning, because there's this innate sense of fear that comes in with every activity that we tend to do. Whether it's like how people say, oh, I'm giving the 100th time of the presentation, but I still have that little fear in me to think, oh my god, I'm going to be facing, the CEO, or I'm going to be facing the head of product and like the team. And so I think what I like about this structure is that it's not telling you that, oh, you know what, you just had this fear. No, 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 just shut it off. Good people, great people will not have this, so just forget yourself. I think it's not doing that. Rather, it's trying to make this more normalized and try to say that even if you have this sort of a vision in your head that you are one of the greatest in the team or one of the greatest in your field, it's still okay to feel that sense of fear or that resistance, and whatever name you might want to call for it. Some people say creative block, some people give it certain terminologies. I think it's completely normal, and it's not necessary for you to push that away. So I think that normalization is something that's very, very strikingly there in the approach that you just shared. And I'm glad that it's just sending people that message that you can find your safe space in trying to find a way through it and not by pushing it away.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, fears are tough. It's like that's why I said I've not done a formal survey, but that's why I said 99.999% of people in the world, we face fears. Okay, maybe someday we transcend fear. Maybe very few of us in our lifetime will transcend fear
Yeah.
entirely, but
Yeah.
fear is a constant. Is a constant,
Yeah.
and we have to just deal with it
Mhm.
as a constant, just like we deal with inclement weather, just like we deal with other things around us that
Yeah.
we have not designed, but they do exist in or around us.
Yep, absolutely. And it's not much of a dirty word as, how the society around makes us think of, whether it's fear or resistance. The minute you face that, it's always, oh, you shouldn't be facing that, or this is not something that should occur to you. Rather, I think it's okay. It's not that of a dirty word to face this and embrace this. So, yeah, I think it's more to do with your routine, and it's something that just leaves you with more room to think about yourself and get better at arriving at that clarity than having to think that you're not somebody who's supposed to face this in the first place.
Mhm.
Yeah. Shares this one last thought I would, love to pounce upon and, listen to your ideas. There's this thinking and forming a pattern that we're discussing about. And when it's largely people thinking about growth or thinking about getting better at their craft, it's always like careers. It's always about, oh, this product needs to have like a growth plan, this product needs to hit a certain revenue, certain metrics, or even like get x number of customers. So growth is always from the sense of things that are very tangible in terms of products, in terms of teams, in terms of companies. But to get better at thinking and to be able to shift the mindset, that's also a sign of growth, right? So how do you get to map growth with your own way of thinking, and how do you make that as a habit and not just associate growth with the external tangible things?
Hmm. Yeah, I get this question often of like, well, Shreyas, you say that competence is the foundation of building a great career, but how do I know I'm improving?
Mm,
And like, how do I know I'm growing, right? And how do I measure that, right? And so one of the things I like to suggest is simply a vocabulary change, which is let's stop talking about measuring it, and instead
mm,
let's start talking about evaluating it, because there's a difference between measuring something and evaluating something. So now all of a sudden, if we are evaluating, right, like I'm trying to get better at design sense, right?
mm,
And I did some things. I took a course, I read a book, I watched some YouTube videos, I did some designs, I kind of watched a few usability studies, and I paired with my designer counterpart, right? Like I created a
mm.
few wireframes, whatever the case might be. uh, After you've done all this, right, my main suggestion is don't worry. Don't worry. You are better. You are better. Now, you are still insecure about this, and some people listening to this will be scratching their head like, what do you mean I'm better? How do I know I'm better? How do I measure I'm better? Right? But that's where I'll remind you that, like, the solution here is to undo the many, many, many years of programming that you went through in school. In school, you were learning chemistry. You did not know anything about chemistry. You went through a bunch of classes, tests, experiments, finals, you got
Mm.
a score, right? If that same final you'd taken at the beginning of the year, you would have got nearly a zero. Now you got a 98. So you have been programmed to think, oh, my competence in chemistry has gone from 0 to 98. Uh, and so the first realization I want you to have is no, actually, your competence in chemistry did not go from 0 to 98. I'm sorry to tell you, because the way the system works, you might still be fairly incompetent in chemistry. You happen to get 98 because you studied to the test and you played by the rules and uh, y-
Mm.
you did all the right things. But as far as knowledge of chemistry is concerned, I don't know. Maybe, yeah, I know it's not zero, but it might still be
Yeah.
a 30. So you scored 98, sure, congrats. But maybe your competence in chemistry is 30. And maybe somebody else who got a 75, their competence is 90,
Mm.
right? So, and especially for us high achievers who've done really well in school, which will likely be most of your listeners, like this is just a hard concept to
Yeah.
internalize, right? Uh, so, so, so anyway, so that we have to get rid of that programming.
Mm.
You see, if you did these things with design, with enthusiasm, with interest, with curiosity,
Mm.
I don't, if I were your manager, I don't need to measure. I don't need you to prove that all of a sudden you're better at design. I can watch you or I can hear you critique a given proposal and I will know. Yeah,
Mm.
clearly in the last 2, 3 months. Because you're pointing out things that you never pointed out before. You are arriving at solutions that you weren't arriving at before. You are raising arguments about user perspective that would have never come up to you before. So just
Mm.
because I'm not sitting here giving you a score after every one-on-one that like, oh, this one-on-one you did 9 out of 10, right? Doesn't mean like you don't need that. You don't need that. So get rid of all of that need for that sort of validation and that kind of scorekeeping,
Right.
right? And just pursue this growth with the right intent and
Mm.
evaluate. Now, the last part I'll say on evaluation is because many people ask, no, Shreyas, all of this is good, but like I need something. Give me something concrete, right? So, what I tell them is a good leading indicator is just ask people that you work closest with.
Mm.
So, the three people you work closest with, ask them after a 3 month period of trying to work on something, whether it's your communication or presentation skills or meeting running skills or presenting to executives or whatever else that you're working on, right? Ask the people who three closest people to you, uh, hey, how would you have rated me 3 months ago? Maybe have them rate you 3 months ago. Keep that rating, and then ask them after 3 months, how would you rate me?
Mm.
And give some examples. Why did you rate me the way you rated me? Right? And have a conversation with them. And
Mm.
by the way, this is how performance evaluations work in these peer evaluation systems. You don't have to wait for your 6 month peer evaluation cycle to do any of
Absolutely.
this. You can run your own perf evaluation anytime you want. It's something I've covered in my course as
Mm.
well, which I know, Aishwarya, you've gone through the careers course. Just like, you don't need to wait for some outside system to get this kind of feedback on how well you're
Exactly.
growing. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, it does, Shreyas. And I think it's also like giving you a sense of forming your own little ways of trying to understand how your signs of growth are rather than waiting for an external validation or more so from, oh, I'm waiting for this person to particularly come and tell me. And when you were telling me about having those two, three people, it reminded me of what most high agency folks call as the personal board of directors. They like bringing in some of these closest people on board and trying to like have them as a like a fallback on or as a sounding board whenever they are yet to take a decision or they are trying to evaluate a lot about themselves. So I think that is a great practice, and to couple to that a lot of self awareness, as you just mentioned, and trying to constantly like analyze and see, okay, is this something that I, would rather focus on the craft and then get going at, rather than having to like sit back and say how much has this measure grown from this scale to this scale. So yeah, that's also I see as a pitfall that we get through, because we get more objective at things that we shouldn't, and rather don't do that in things that we should.
Mhm.
So yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, Shreyas, it's been amazing having you on the chat. We delved a lot deeper into some of these aspects of thinking. And so most of the anecdotes that you brought in were very contextual to product builders. And I would largely say any, any person who's following a creative passion and who's trying to get better at their craft. So I would love for the listeners to take in this and apply it across the work that they're doing. So thank you so much for sharing a lot of what you've been through from your experience.
Thanks for having me. It was a blast. Really enjoyed our conversation, and looking forward to hearing about how your audience finds this useful.
For sure. Yeah, yeah, definitely. Will keep you posted. Thanks, Shreyas.